Welcome to A Wild Mystery Podcast Appears, where we discuss mysteries, histories, and occasionally conspiracies. I'm your host, Ollie.
And I'm your co-host, Belle.
Today we will be discussing the murder of Georgi Markov, a Bulgarian writer in 1978 in London.
The trigger warnings for today's episode include death, poisoning, assassination, communism, the Soviet Union, propaganda, and censorship. If you do not feel like you can listen to any of these topics today, we do encourage you to listen to one of our other episodes. The opinions expressed in this podcast are the sole views and opinions of Belle and Ollie with A Wild Mystery Podcast Appears. These views are not intended to harm, offend, defame, slander, or negatively represent any individuals involved in a case.
And a couple of quick notes, especially on this one because there are a lot of conspiracy theories involved. I wanted to emphasize that if I credit a photo to someone on our social media, that does not mean that I read the article or that the information in the article is part of my sources. It just that they might have just had the best quality pictures. So, just wanted to get that out before, And then, additionally, some of this stuff was a little bit hard to verify or was kind of mentioned differently in each different source. So this is a combination of all of my sources. Additionally, this is our last season of the episode. What? This is our last episode of the season.
The end of season 2 already. It amazes me how far it's come so far.
I know, we're going into season 3. What the fuck?
Well, and so I sent you the pictures from 2022 Spotify Wrapped.
Yeah.
And it was you've created 888 minutes of content. And I was looking at that number. First of all, 888 is just kind of a cool number. But I was just to put all of what we've done this year, not including the last 2 episodes, or because Spotify Wrapped, I don't know, what day is it up until it extends to.
Oh, yeah.
Because
I don't know.
They start Spotify Wrapped at the start of, or the end of November, and end of November, start of December. So we're not technically done creating content for the year.
I also thought it was funny that they said, we had, what was it, a 200% increase in listenership since last year? And I was well...
Oh,
yeah.
You had 249% more engagement from the week of May 1st through the 7th as opposed to the previous week, which is the week that we started the podcast.
So
it was well,
thank you.
But thank you for the obviousness. But it's to know that we created that much within a little over half the year.
Yeah.
It's insane.
It's pretty cool.
And I'm pretty happy with, even the improvements that we've made from season 1 to season 2.
Yeah, I mean, fucking look we're sitting, there's more room in this closet.
Yep. We're still recording in a closet.
Yeah. But that's gonna be the deal for a while.
Yeah. I mean, we have plans to expand, and then we also have improved mics. We are now sitting across from each other as opposed to coffin corner. And I'm just excited for... I'm excited for the end of this season, but I'm also very excited for what next season's going to bring, because I know we've got a lot of improvements that we're going to try and bring for you guys. Our expectation is to come back on March 2nd, but you will see some promo for the new season prior to March 2nd, but we look forward to bringing you that new content when we get to that point.
Yeah. And make sure also to check out, we may or may not have a poll or a question on this episode if you're on Spotify, so check it out if there is one.
Yep.
So, Georgi Markov was, by the way, it could be Georgi in Bulgarian, but it sounds better to say Georgi in English, so here we are. So Georgi Markov was born on March 1st, 1929 in Sofia, Bulgaria. He graduated high school in 1946 and then started at university studying industrial chemistry. He got tuberculosis when he was 19, and that ended up, because of that, obviously, spending a lot of time in hospital, and he spent a lot of that time writing. So in 1957, he published his first novel, The Night of Celsius. And in 1962, he published some more like, in between these two. But in 1962, he published his novel Men, which won the annual award of the Union of Bulgarian Writers, and subsequently he became a part of that union, which assisted him in his professional career in literature.
Wow.
Which I just love the career pivot from industrial chemistry to writer.
Yeah. Also just love the fact that he named a novel Men.
Yeah.
Alright, cool.
Yeah. So he started working at Narodna Mladej Publishing House. I am sorry to all the Bulgarians out there. He also, over his life, wrote a number of novels and plays. He wrote for the popular Bulgarian TV drama At Each Kilometer. It was generally, like a freaking prodigy, he started writing at 19, and yeah.
Because, like, I feel like, for the most part, everyone kind of dabbles in writing when they're young, but, like, to make a career out of it, like,
yeah,
relatively young is, like, that's really impressive.
Yeah. So, we can't talk about the murder of Georgi Markov without talking about politics in Bulgaria. So, this is going to be, just wanted to do a quick rundown of what politics was like at the time. So, communist rule over Bulgaria started in 1944 and went until 1989. From about either 1944 or 1946 to 1956, there was Stalinist rule in Bulgaria. This was around this time Markov was a teen and a student, and this was Stalinist rule that would have included mass execution, general and direct physical fear, all that kind of stuff that you generally associate with communism.
Yeah.
So from 1956 to about 1968 was more liberalized politics, so it's more subtlety in the power of the regime, social and political corruption. There's not any real traumatic events to disrupt the regime's power. And then Eurozine, one of the quotes from them is, "If anything, the absence of organized dissent movements was itself a symptom of the social corrosion." So the Communist Party in Bulgaria had a large headquarters in Sofia, which again is the city that Georgi was born in. The prime minister from 1954 to 1989 was Todor Zhivkov. Again, I'm sorry to Bulgarians. So this is at the time.
I think
like,
you're doing
most
great,
of this, yeah.
but that means nothing
Yeah.
to anybody else.
So, another important piece of kind of context here is that Stalin felt that writers, or how he referred to them, the cultural elite, had an important role in shaping popular opinion. This is writers and artists.
Okay.
So therefore, the independent thought of writers and artists, if they had independent thought against the regime, that was dangerous. So Zhivkov obviously did buy into this to a pretty big extent, because one of the big things that he did was he attempted to kind of co-opt and coerce a lot of writers and poets into serving the communist regime in Bulgaria. Markov reportedly, he actually really played along with the censors at first. He was a super, super popular writer. He attended dinners, parties, poker games with politicians, and he reportedly even took hikes with Zhivkov.
Wow.
Yeah. So he was fairly wealthy. It was reported pretty much everywhere that he had like a shiny silver BMW, like he had a nice car. And he wrote at one point, wrote at one point, "That was precisely the purpose behind the sweet life offered us, to stop us writing." Later on in his career, though, Georgi kind of, he started to grow disgusted by the communist regime and by his own participation in it. And this led to him writing more against the communist regime, which is fucking ballsy.
Yeah, no
like,
kidding.
so specifically, like, some of his plays later were removed from theater by Communist Party censors. I think I saw that none of his plays ever were performed in Bulgaria. Specifically, he wrote about events that the Communist Party wasn't pleased about. So the collapse of the roof of the Lenin steel mill, he wrote about that both literally and allegorically in his novel, The Roof, fittingly.
Wow, he was ballsy.
Yeah, which was halted mid-printing for obvious reasons.
Well, I mean, I'm surprised they got halfway through.
I know, yeah.
Well, it's like, okay.
They got all the way to printing. Like,
Well, it got to printing, and then, but like, in that,
they printed a few
midway
copies,
through
yeah.
printing. And it's like, how many copies were printed, or were they doing the thing where it's like only the first half of the book was printed, or like, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, I don't know.
It's like, define what level of
Yeah.
But that's just a me thing.
Yeah. So in the summer of 1969, he actually left Bulgaria for Italy, which is where his brother lived. He left behind a now ex-wife, Zdravka Lekova, I'm sorry, who he did continue to write to. And I wasn't clear in any of my sources. I wasn't 100% clear whether they had divorced prior or whether him leaving was the end of the relationship. You know what I mean?
Yeah, if they were like actually divorced or if they were just like separated.
Yeah. But I feel like it probably did end before he left, because otherwise why wouldn't he have taken her? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But anyway, summer of 1969, he left for Italy. Initially, he kind of just wanted to wait until the authorities in Bulgaria kind of chilled out about him. He was really worried that his criticism of the regime was going to land him in prison. So he leaves. And eventually he decided, I probably should just stay in the West. This decision was partially influenced by the September 1971 decision by the Bulgarian government not to extend his passport.
Okay.
So this is another quote from Eurozine, or Eurozine. Markov's decision to abandon Bulgaria and throw away his entire career, fame, money, and privileges was a product of his growing disgust with his own participation in the system and his frustration with the increasingly reactionary politics in Bulgaria, end quote. So in 1971, he ended up moving to London. And this was super rough at first because he did not speak English or have really any resources. From what I was reading, it sounded like there were a lot of communist dissenters that were seeking asylum in London or in England at the time. And a lot of the defectors from larger countries, they had built-in resources in England, like resources for Russians, for example, to learn English, to get jobs, to that kind of thing. But there weren't those resources for Bulgarians because Bulgaria is such a small country. It just kind of got overlooked.
Well, it's like a common example of this is like right now we have quite a few Ukrainian refugees, and we have a lot of programs to help them get settled with similar programs.
Yeah. But because Bulgaria sort of got overlooked in this, he was like largely on his own. So he ended up writing to Lekova, who's again his ex-wife, from London. Quote, "The coming days may be difficult and impoverished. Then again, I might be lucky. But the most important thing for me is that I will write the works I want to write without taking anyone's opinion into account." End quote. Which,
baller.
Yeah. Fuck yeah, bro. And he did just that. So, 1972, he started working for the Bulgarian section of BBC World Service, which I didn't realize how fucking big BBC is.
BBC's insane.
And it shouldn't surprise me. It didn't really surprise me, but I was kind of like, holy shit, bro.
Whoa.
Like, so he was working for BBC World Service, but he was not writing politics for BBC. And it was actually a big, like, factor in a lot of these sources that they specifically mentioned BBC does not write. They called it propaganda. And I guess, depending on how you look at it, anything is propaganda, you know?
Yeah. If it's, you know, one side of the story and not, like, a fact.
Yeah. But Georgie also worked for Deutsche Welle and Radio Free Europe, which I don't think I do refer to as RFE, but it was referred to sometimes as RFE. So Deutsche Welle was a Western propaganda and information station from West Germany. And again, Western propaganda, that is not my wording. And then Radio Free Europe was a US-sponsored broadcaster in Europe, a US-sponsored broadcaster in Europe. This was wild to me. Originally funded by the CIA as a propaganda tool. But their relationship ended and also became public by the year 1972.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So it was considered at this time, you know, at around this time, I mean, to be a good source for uncensored news. It broadcast in many languages, including Bulgarian, and lots of governments, including the Bulgarian government at the time, tried to jam the frequency or disable receivers from operating on the right wavelengths to receive it. But people across the Soviet countries still found ways to tune in. Apparently some would go to different cities on the day that it was broadcast. Or, you know, I'm sure you can get around stuff like disabling receivers from receiving those wavelengths, you know? Mm-hmm. So, largely a failed effort.
Okay.
So, also in 1972, Georgie's membership in the Union of Bulgarian Writers was suspended, and he was sentenced in absentia to 6 years and 6 months in prison for defecting. Which I always think that the idea that citizens who are not enrolled in the military or anything defect, I just find that fucking hilarious.
It's very funny.
But also horrifying.
Yeah.
So, anyway. His works were removed from stores and libraries in Bulgaria, and his name was not mentioned by the official Bulgarian media until 1989, when Communist Party rule ended. And I just want to take a second to emphasize how popular he was.
Yeah, that's
And then they
crazy.
just removed everything. Like, they erased him. Like Scientology.
Yeah.
And then the Bulgarian Secret Service also started his file under the codename Wanderer, which I think is badass. But so, in 1974, Georgie's plays started running in the UK, specifically London, I can't speak, and Edinburgh. This included at least one play that was blocked by communist censors in Bulgaria. This was called To Crawl Under the Rainbow. He also, at this time, started writing in English. And in 1974, meets Annabelle Dilke, I'm sorry, who I think she's still alive, the daughter of the former head of BBC's English by radio service. On July 5th of 1975, he and Annabelle get married. And in 1976, their daughter, in various sources, either Alexandra Reina or Sasha. His tombstone says Sasha. So I think Sasha?
Uh-huh.
I have no freaking clue why there are so many different names attributed to this child. But she was born in 1976. Okay, so I'm pretty sure his daughter's name is Alexandra Reina, but his tombstone for some reason says Sasha. So I don't know if that was maybe to protect her and not put her correct name on the tombstone.
Could be.
Or if that was a nickname, or I don't know. But here we are. So the little family of three lived in a house in South London. So from 1975 to 1978, he worked on the in absentia reports. Just want to flag for a second him being sentenced in absentia for defecting.
Yeah, that's...
Yeah.
Yeesh.
So I fucking love that. So he didn't write any political stuff for BBC, but he super duper did for Radio Free Europe. In absentia was an analysis of life in communist Bulgaria. It broadcast weekly on Radio Free Europe, and it was a mix of personal and overheard stories. So he acknowledged his role in the system back in Bulgaria and actually talked a lot about the secret lives of those he met in the high life. Politicians, Todor Zhivkov. He wrote about victims of the system as well, so like factory workers, prostitutes, students, whoever. He talked about everyday stuff, and included in that, criticized the Communist Party, the Communist government, and specifically leader Todor Zhivkov. So Eurozine, another quote from them, I just thought that like that article, it had a lot of really good insights into like his effect on the Communist Party in Bulgaria. And it worded it in some really good ways. So another one of their quotes, by exposing the regime's ideological fraudulence and moral hypocrisy, by showing its pedestrian, everyday character, the banality of its evil, he undermined the grand project of myth-making that every political system relies on for its legitimacy and survival. Basically, in absentia really pissed off Communist Party leaders in Bulgaria. And this was partly because, reportedly, a lot of politicians listened to it.
Really?
Yeah. So, of the Bulgarian population of about 8 million at the time, 5 million Bulgarians listened to In Absentia.
Wow.
The regime was concerned that the show was kind of sowing the seeds of dissidence within the elite of Bulgaria, which they needed on their side. So, in 1975, the Helsinki Accords were signed by Soviet countries, including Bulgaria. These accords were worded to try and protect the basic human rights and freedom of thought of citizens. And they were not binding by the signature, but a lot of resistors found power in them anyway. So a lot of Eastern European dissenters actually started fighting back a lot more after the Helsinki Accords were signed. Soviet countries, they weren't above exiling writers, but Markov wasn't in the country. So, like, what do they do about him? And with that, we're going to take a quick ad break on that cliffhanger, and we'll be back. On September 7th, 1978, Georgi was 49 years old, and his daughter was 2. This is just for some context. He had a normal afternoon shift at BBC. He worked in Bush House in the Aldwych, London. And he had a habit in these late night shifts to leave his car in a car park on the south side of Waterloo Bridge at the beginning, walk across to go to work, then go grab his car and park it closer to the office later in the evening when parking restrictions lifted.
Smart.
Yeah. So, when he was walking, obviously, across Waterloo Bridge, this is one of those things that, like, is reported differently in every article. Because some article says this happened on Waterloo Bridge. Some say it was on the other side. Some say it was right outside of Bush House. Either way, he was walking to work, passing a bus stop, and he felt a sharp pain in the back of his right thigh. He turns around and he sees a 40-ish-year-old heavy-set man pick up an umbrella. And then this man apologizes in a heavy foreign accent, kind of broken English, and hails a taxi. Georgie later said that the man seemed to have trouble with his English when he was speaking to the cab driver. He arrives to work and, he asked a colleague to take a look at the puncture mark, but largely he didn't really give it much thought. He kind of felt pretty okay throughout the day.
I'm wondering if it was like when they looked at it, they determined that it was a puncture mark, because otherwise it would just be like, oh, why does this thing hurt? But I think
he kind of just assumed. There was one or two sources that kind of made it seem like he thought it might have been a splinter, or like that the guy poked him with the tip of his umbrella by accident and might have drawn a bit of blood, so maybe double check.
Okay, that makes sense.
At about 10:30 p.m., that's when he arrived home. Shift ends. He seemed, Annabelle said he was pretty much in a good mood. He went to bed in his study, which was at the very top of the house, top floor, because he had to be in at 2:30 in the morning. And when he had such an early shift, he tended to, hang in his study for the night, crash in the study to avoid disturbing his wife in the morning, which I thought was cute.
That is sweet, actually.
Yeah. On the morning of the 8th, Annabelle heard him moving around at about 2 a.m., which would be pretty normal, I think. Although, to be fair, I would be up before then and out by 2 a.m., but, whatever. I don't know how long his commute was, or...
Yeah.
So, Annabelle, at the inquest that was later, said he had been sick and was very hot and had a high temperature, end quote. So she called their family doctor, who said it sounded like the flu. Important to note at this point, did not come over and see him. Just said from his symptoms, it sounded like the flu. Which Georgie also thought. But at this time, Georgie also tells his wife about the umbrella man and was now worried that that might have something to do with his illness. So... a little bit before midnight on the 8th, he was admitted to the emergency ward at St. James Hospital after the family doctor finally arrived and saw Georgie in person. And I'm not totally sure if he was taken by ambulance or by car, again, reported differently. I don't think it's that important.
Yeah.
So, at this point in time, he had a fever and was severely sick, and was insisting to doctors that he had been poisoned by a toxic dart. A Bulgarian friend from the BBC at the time warned doctors that it might not be a natural illness. It sounded from this source that the friend had gone with Georgie and Annabelle to the hospital. Maybe drove Annabelle, whatever. So doctors quickly realized that Georgie was not responding to any treatment that they administered, which is clearly alarming. They found that his white blood cell count was reportedly the highest that any of them had ever seen, which is wild.
Yeah.
On the 9th, he went into shock and almost died, but survived. But on September 11th of 1978, at about 10 p.m., he passed away due to cardiac arrest.
Wow.
Yep. So again, from the 7th to the 11th.
Wow. So painful.
Yep. So, because this was fucking weird as fuck, and at this point, doctors had not determined why he was sick. So, Scotland Yard ordered a thorough autopsy. Because at this point, they were looking. The autopsy found the cause of death to be septicemia, which is a kind of acute blood poisoning. And, critically, they found a small metal pellet in the back of his right thigh.
Interesting.
Yep. So the pellet was made up of 90% platinum and 10% iridium, which is an alloy used in high-temperature electronic connections and jet engines. It has a high melting point, and it is resistant to corrosion. So this is not the kind of alloy that is just being made in, jewelry shops. It's specialized. It was about 1.7 millimeters in diameter, which is smaller than a pinhead. And it had two 3.5 millimeters holes drilled into the center in kind of an X shape. So it almost sounded to me like it had 4 holes in it. But they were essentially, it had only been drilled twice. So if we go over to our pictures, I have at least one. Yeah, I have 2 pictures. One next to a nail for comparison, and one that I thought kind of showed, oh yeah, and that one I feel like you can kind of see the end of another hole on the side there.
Yeah.
And then the other one I just thought was a good, nice, clear picture of what it looked like. So this is, clearly man-made, right? Not just a random piece of metal that ended up in this man's leg. So at the time, before his death, obviously, Markov was actually getting super paranoid and worried about his own safety. So Dimitar Kanarov, who was a Bulgarian freelance journalist that he worked with sometimes, he said that Markov had received threats. He had told coworkers that the Bulgarian authorities were gunning for him. He would lock himself in his office, and sometimes when he was over at friend's house, he wouldn't eat the food. This was generally, Kanarov described it as the kind of things that a lot of people who had defected from Soviet countries, kind of the ways that a lot of those people behaved. Peter Frankel, who was the head of BBC East European services at the time, he also said that Georgi, confirmed he was paranoid. Also described him as being in poor health and having kidney troubles. Okay. Which I thought was kind of interesting. Doesn't really tie into anything else, but is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So Teo Lirkov, who was the dude who told doctors that this illness might not be natural, he was a Bulgarian coworker at the BBC and also a close friend of Markov, and Markov told him in detail about the umbrella counter. They also left to go home together on the 7th, and at the time, Lirkov said that Markov was feeling a little weak and in pain. So
that's weird.
Yeah. I wonder if this is the dude that he asked to look at the wound. But I'm not totally sure.
Okay.
So pretty much everybody in Georgi's life did confirm that he was receiving threats. Annabelle reports that Georgi's mom got a passport to come visit them in London in 1977 and was told by the authorities in Bulgaria to tell her son to stop writing for Radio Free Europe, which is terrifying. Like, how terrified would you be as her? But
wow, that's scary.
Yeah, and he was also apparently warned by someone that he was going to be poisoned. This is confirmed by many people, including Annabelle and Teo Lirkov. Annabelle wrote an article about this whole situation on the first anniversary of his death. And in her wording, it sounded to me like she knew who this person was, but was kind of keeping it quiet. But if she does, then Georgi probably also knew who it was,
Yeah.
He received a call about 3 months before his death saying that if he didn't stop writing for Radio Free Europe, he'd be executed. And I feel like this might be the same threat that Annabelle was referring to. But I couldn't tell for sure from the different articles.
Yeah.
So take that with a grain of salt. And he also probably survived 2 previous assassination attempts.
Hardcore.
Yeah, in the same year. So in Munich, in the spring of 1978, he was visiting friends and colleagues at Radio Free Europe, and someone put a toxin in his drink at a dinner party held in his honor, which is an asshole move.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, but like...
yeah, but it's like, come on.
Yeah. And then, additionally, in Sardinia, an Italian island, there was an assassination attempt when he was on a summer vacation with his family. But that is literally all the information I could find on that. So, on September 29th, Scotland Yard announces that he was murdered. Duh. And it
Real
really
stroke of genius there, boys.
It really was like, because I read some of the articles at the time, and they were all kind of like, "What is Scotland Yard doing?" Like they know he was murdered, right? But they're being so sketchy about it, and then Scotland Yard announces it, and all the articles were
everyone,
like, "Yeah,
we have an announcement. Grass is green.
Yeah,
thank you for coming."
Like, okay,
yeah. You know what? That doesn't help.
So we are going to take our second ad break.
Okay.
Well, we digest that. So Vladimir Kostov was a Bulgarian exile living in Paris. He was a former head of the Paris Bureau of the Bulgarian State Radio and TV Network, which is a mouthful, and was granted political asylum by France in June of 1977. On September 26th, an identical pellet to the one removed from Markov was removed from Kostov's back by doctors with Scotland Yard detectives present. Yeah. So 3 weeks before Markov's attack, Kostov was also attacked in Paris. On August 27th, 1978, he was leaving Arc de Triomphe metro station when he heard a crack like an air gun and felt a sting on the right side of his back. The wound kind of swelled up, but he recovered quickly, and the pellet was not discovered until September. So, yeah. So they originally knew that Markov was likely poisoned, but it was tough for them to figure out which poison at first. Mm-hmm. The size of the pellet ruled out a lot of poisons, obviously, because it's freaking minuscule.
Yeah, because a lot of them have to have a certain volume in order to reach potency.
Yeah. So experts in bacterial warfare agents were brought in from the Ministry of Defense, and they were eventually able to test residue left behind in the pellet and determined it was ricin. So on January 2nd of 1979, the coroner's inquest held in London concluded the cause of death was toxemia caused by a pellet containing ricin, and that Markov could not have administered this poison himself. So let's talk about ricin for a second. So ricin is a residual material left behind when oil is pressed from the castor beans / plant.
Okay.
About 5% of the waste mash by weight in this process is ricin.
Okay.
It is more lethal than cobra venom.
Wow.
Yeah. The lethal dose is between 5 to 10 micrograms per kilogram. So I did the math, and forgive me if this is not exactly accurate. It would be Google's fault, not mine. But for the average male in the UK, the lethal dose would be 0.4 to 0.84 milligrams, i.e. less than a milligram.
Wow. Very tiny.
Yeah. It was found that the cavity in the pellet was capable of holding up to 500 milligrams of ricin, but probably wasn't actually loaded with that much for murder. Yeah. Which is, that number is why I was like, did I do that math right? But like, I'm pretty sure I did it right.
Okay.
So, accidental poisonings have been reported in children who chewed on the seeds of the plant, which I really only mention to be like, injections are not usually accidental.
Yeah.
So, symptoms in an intramuscular injection, which would be like Georgie's exposure, they appear a few hours after the injection and consist of a high fever, abdominal pain, vomiting, diarrhea, which is sometimes bloody, and decrease in urination, severe dehydration, decreased blood pressure, and a very high white blood cell count. We can name a few of those that line up with Georgi's symptoms. These symptoms can often imitate diseases such as the flu. So there is some evidence that the Bulgarian Secret Service sought help from the KGB to, quote, physically liquidate Markov. Which is a wild wording. But anyway, Bulgaria fired back at suspicion from the West, saying that Markov was a Western intelligence agent that was killed by said Western agency when he outlived his usefulness. However, this explanation is generally ridiculed by everyone.
Okay.
Yeah, sure, hun.
Sure, Jan.
So, Annabelle believes that he was supposed to die on the 9th or 10th, and I actually find this really interesting. So September 9th was the anniversary observed for the start of the communist rule in Bulgaria. So it'd be a very poetic date of death for him. And they probably assumed he was going to die a couple days after the poison.
Yeah.
So, you know.
I guess they should
September,
have loaded it up with more if they wanted him to die faster.
So September 10th, he also, remember that September 9th is the day that he went into shock and almost died. But,
yep.
Western medicine. That was a joke.
Our bodies are pretty incredible.
Yeah, our bodies are pretty hardy. And Annabelle seemed like she kind of believed that I don't know if she believes necessarily that he was really trying to make it through, but I wouldn't be surprised, frankly.
Yeah, I mean,
if he was like, I'm not dying on this day. Fuck
Fuck
y'all.
Last act of defiance. Yeah. I would do that shit. Be like, I will live out of spite. Just
as a fuck you to Bulgaria. So, September 10th was the day of the militia and state security in Bulgaria. So, and then also interesting to note that September 7th was Todor Zhivkov's birthday. So, like, Bulgarian Communist Party, like, you can say what you want, but, like, that's a lot of coincidences. So, additionally, in 1989, after the collapse of the Bulgarian communist regime, reportedly, I can't confirm this, but reportedly, a stack of umbrellas that were modified to fire pellets was reportedly found in the Interior Ministry. So let's mention General Oleg Kalugin, who is Russian, former KGB, exiled, the source said exiled to the US in 1991. But, like, did they tell him to go to the US or was he just exiled? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I was reading that and I was like, okay, what does that mean?
Yeah. So he's exiled in 1991. I think he probably decided to go to the US. So he claims that he oversaw the assassination program targeted at Markov. So I want to, like, flag really quick. Markov died in 1978. Oleg Kalugin did not move to the US until 1991. So there's a massive gap between these two revelations.
Yeah.
So and I say to the extent that he can confirm, because, like, he has given a lot of details that seem very convincing, but without hard, we don't have evidence in this case, you know what I mean? We have the pellet, and that's it. We can't 100% say for certain that this is 110% what happened. But to the extent that he can, he confirmed that the KGB made the umbrellas that killed him.
Okay.
So if we go back, there is actually a couple different pictures. One of these pictures shows, like, kind of a mock-up of what the mechanisms within the umbrella, and the other one is a replica that is in the spy museum.
Sick.
Yeah, of the umbrella.
I love the spy museum. I just want to point that out. That's great.
I want to go there someday. Yeah.
Maybe.
I just love the name, the Spy Museum.
It just sounds, it's just cool.
Yeah. But anyway, so he confirms to the extent that he can that the KGB created this umbrella, patented it, whatever. His reasoning that he attributes to the KGB for carrying this out was that they wanted to manage the relationship with the Bulgarians. Basically, they wanted to humor the Bulgarian government for the purpose of keeping them on Russia's side. So, the Bulgarians reportedly claimed that this was like a 100% personal, totally not political assassination. 100%, like, couldn't possibly, why would it have been political?
Okay.
What? Who would have guessed political? The idea, I guess, is that Georgi had been in a relationship with Todor Zhivkov's daughter, Ludmila, and that he had been unfaithful. Never in another source have I seen that this relationship happened. I do not believe, I genuinely do not believe that he was ever in a relationship with this woman. But my theory here is that Chairman Andropov of the KGB strongly disapproved of political assassinations. Apparently. Again, I'm not sure I believe that. But my theory here is that maybe, because obviously the idea that it wasn't a political assassination is bullshit, right? Like, right. We can both agree.
Oh, yeah. No,
this is a political assassination.
Absolutely.
So, my theory is that maybe the Bulgarian Communist Party was worried that the KGB wouldn't help them if they said it was political, so maybe spun this story to get them to carry it out.
Mm-hmm.
In 1992, General Vladimir... Okay, so Bulgarian Communist government topples in 1989, right? 1992, General Vladimir Todorov, who was the former intelligence chief in Bulgaria, was sentenced to 16 months in jail in Bulgaria for destroying files related to Markov's death.
Because that's not suspicious.
Yeah. General Stoyan...
Actually, what's more surprising is that he actually was arrested and...
Yeah, it seemed to me like whoever took over after Communist Party in Bulgaria, well, they're pretty good, Yeah. They corrected.
not shitty. Not as shitty.
As certain governments. Who will not be named. So General Stoyan Savov, who is the former deputy interior minister, killed himself before he could be brought to trial. And then Vasily Kotsev, who is the believed operational commander, died in an unexplained car crash. This is all in Bulgaria.
Oh my god.
Yeah. So there's just a lot of shit that is like, holy...
Political plots are interesting, but terrifying nonetheless.
So Scotland Yard detectives made one more major attempt to solve the case in 2008, which was before the Bulgarian statute of limitations passed. They, in that year, visited Bulgaria twice. They requested access to archives, permission to interview 40 witnesses, and permission to interview former secret police. It didn't happen, they didn't find out people, but, like, the issue here is, like, it was the KGB. Like, let's be real. But we don't know who, So nobody could be charged, is the issue. That's why this case is unsolved. So, Georgi Markov was buried in a churchyard in Whitchurch, Dorset. His epitaph reads, died London, 11/9/1978, in the cause of freedom. Quick note for Americans, they switched the day and the month in dates in Europe. So that is the right date.
they do day, month, year.
That definitely, there was a minute there where I was like, wait.
Hold on.
Wait.
It still confuses me, and then it'll be like 24, 8, whatever year, and I'm like...
The 24th month?
Like,
what? And let's be real. That makes more sense to put it day, month, year. Because the smallest increments of time to the largest increments of time It just makes more sense to me. But anyway.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it, like...
Oh, okay. No, that way it does make sense. But I feel like...
It's just because we're so used to doing it month, day, year.
Well, because I think that the converse could also be true, is that technically there are only 12 months with a possibility of 31 days.
Yeah.
With, however many potential years.
Yeah. Okay. However you look at it. Let's not start this argument.
Yeah.
We're having a bullshit token that we're recording next, so... The in absentia reports were published in Bulgaria in 1990 after the fall of the communist government, obviously. Mm-hmm. They apparently, some of them were published in English in England, but they quickly went out of print, which I find kind of disappointing because I would kind of like to read them.
Yeah.
But I just... Finding that one book for the Joan Risch case, like, I can't do it again. I can't do it.
I can't go through
I can't go back there. But who knows? If fucking anybody knows of somewhere I can find the translation, just fucking hit me up, man. Anyway.
Let me know.
It is widely accepted, obviously, that he was killed by a KGB agent acting on behalf, Jesus Christ, of the Bulgarian Secret Service / the Bulgarian government at the time. Which, again, duh.
Yeah. Very obvious. Very plain to see.
So, yeah. In 2000, he was posthumously awarded the Order of Stara Planina for his work, which is the Bulgaria's, quote, most prestigious honor. It was presented to his daughter. Which, again, this is just, it tells me that Bulgaria... They
were trying to do shit
like
right after.
Yeah, they pivoted, and they pivoted in the right direction.
Yeah.
So Annabelle says that Bulgarians visiting the West would sometimes find ways to send messages to Georgi when he was still alive, thanking him for in absentia and his other work. Mm-hmm. Like just generally saying, we appreciate you. You're doing good. And then after his death, a Bulgarian wrote to Annabelle. She actually said he was in the Soviet Union, and he gave his address and his full name, like, brave-ass dude who wrote to Annabelle after Georgi's death to tell her that, quote, ever since Georgi's death, the people of his country had been crushed by depression, end quote. And then I want to read her last couple paragraphs in that article that she wrote the anniversary of his death. Mm-hmm. As far as the dissident emigre community is concerned, I have no reason to believe it has been intimidated. Georgi's murder conveyed the clear threat to all dissidents abroad. We can get you whenever and wherever we choose. But many of those involved in the same kind of dangerous work as Georgi have made a point of contacting me since he died to offer support and sympathy. One such person told me, I was not a fighter before, but now I am. Another said, when they killed Georgi Markov, they created 1,000 Georgi Markovs. The message of my husband's life and death, and of their consequences, seems to be that the human spirit is not so easily crushed. And I just want to say, when they killed Georgi Markov, they created 1,000 Georgi Markovs is fucking badass as shit.
Yeah, that's a hardcore line.
So if you do have any information, you can contact the Metropolitan Police within the UK at 101 or outside the UK at 4420 7230 1212. Or you can contact Crimestoppers at 0800 555 111. And then at Crimestoppers, you can remain anonymous. I'm also including links to the Metropolitan Police and UK Crimestoppers websites in the description and social media. And you can submit tips online through either site. I don't know if you can submit anonymously through the Metropolitan Police website because they asked screening questions about the crime I was, quote, reporting so that they could send me the right online form. And I was scared to fill it out because I was like, I'm not actually reporting a crime. I just want to know if you can stay anonymous. But they did specifically say to contact Crimestoppers if you wanted to remain anonymous because Crimestoppers won't ask any questions about you. So I'm not sure if that means that the police does ask questions, but you can just not answer, or if it means that you can't stay anonymous. But anyway.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So, another quick tip from the Met Police. You know how in the US, you can hit star 97 before you make a call and it'll withhold your number from... In the UK, you can dial 141 before dialing, and it will withhold your number.
I wonder if you're dialing internationally, if you would have to do your local code?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Google it.
Yeah, let's Google it real quick.
I was just going to make them do it.
Oh, yeah, I don't even know how to Google that.
Yeah.
Whatever. Do it both.
Yeah, just... I don't know.
Well, and I mean, people might not be calling from the US anyway. Like, you know, it could be people calling not from the US and also not from the UK.
True. Google and figure out what's most relevant to your situation.
Yeah.
Interesting thing. I don't know if you thought about this. Sasha, Alexandra, whatever.
Yeah.
She's only 46.
Yeah. This has been the case of Georgi Markov, the murder of a Bulgarian writer in 1978 in London. Thank you for listening to today's episode of A Wild Mystery Podcast Appears, recorded and produced by Ollie and Belle.
Please check out all of our social media where we have additional information shared. You can find all of those links at our website at awmpa.com.
We'd love to hear your feedback for our podcast, so be sure to rate and review.
Tune in next week for another episode of A Wild Mystery Podcast Appears.